All right, hello and welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started for our webinar today. Today we're going to be talking about 2Gen practice and opportunity use. We have some presenters with us today from ICF. And so I'll go through some introductory information about our learning community. Our Learning Community Resource Center is the host of this webinar today as part of our Webinar Wednesday series that we do every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And my name is Courtney Kohler. I'm a senior associate with the National Community Action Partnership and work on the training and technical assistance team. So I'll be kind of facilitating the background, helping with any technical pieces today, as well as kind of introducing our presenters for today. So a few notes before we get started. We are recording this session, so it will be available afterwards to share with your colleagues or review information. We do also plan to share out the PDF of the slide deck, so you will have the slides available to you as well. We generally post those on our website within 2 business days. Under the Tools and Resources section, there's a webinar library as well as a publication and toolkit library. So you'll find that under the webinar library there. Another piece of information, if you are having trouble hearing, if it's not coming through very well with your computer speakers, sometimes it'll come through a little better if you call into the event. So if you ever need to reboot your audio or switch audio at any time during the presentation, you can go to the Communicate tab in the upper left-hand corner of the screen and go to Audio Connection, and that'll give you a couple different options if you're having difficulties. You can also try to chat me if you're having any troubles as well. We will have a question and answer session towards the end. And so what we ask you to do is that throughout the webinar presentation, please submit your questions through the chat box and go ahead and send those to all panelists so that all of the presenters as well as myself can see those questions, and then I'll help facilitate those to our presenters towards the end. And then if you need to send any direct messages to me, you can just click on host or my name under the to area of the chat box. All right, well, other than that, I think we're ready to get started. So we always like to start out our webinars with the promise of community action. Just grounds us in the work that we're doing all across the country as a community action network. So you can kind of follow along with this promise at your desk. Community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. So as I mentioned, this is part of our Learning Communities Resource Center, and we facilitate webinars throughout our Webinar Wednesday series, every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And the purpose of our Learning Community Resource Center is really to analyze community action outcomes and be able to identify those effective, promising, and innovative practice models that are happening all across the country as well as out in the field that really help to alleviate the causes and conditions of poverty. So we're really all about building community action agencies' capacity to be able to fight poverty in their local area. So all of this is kind of reflected through our National Community Action Network Theory of Change. We have, of course, our 3 national goals, which are focused around those individuals and families that are being served in the local communities, as well as those communities that are being revitalized and worked with and engaging those people in those communities. Of course, you can see here our services and strategies that kind of help to make all of this possible. And then the foundational core principles and performance management framework that we operate within as well. So our learning community has about 7 different learning community group topics. And we have open learning community groups, which are available to anyone in the network at any time. So these kind of have this open enrollment. All of the resources and past events are available to everyone on Community Action Academy, our online learning management system. And then the intensive LCGs that you see on the screen in the middle are by application only. And so that comes around about once a year or so. And so this one really relates to the topics of integrated services as well as whole family approaches. This webinar today does. And so a lot of times, even though these are kind of those intensive LCGs that are kind of smaller cohorts by application, we do a lot of sharing of that same knowledge that they are getting within that learning community out to the national network. And so this is one of those times where we're kind of sharing out this information on 2Gen practice and opportunity use that relates to some of these learning community groups, as well as our whole family community of practice. So really what we aim to do with this learning community is to take small actions and lots of people and create big change. So our learning community, just to give you a picture of what we're made up of, is we have all 11 regions that are involved. We have 33 states across the nation that are engaged in the learning community, as well as 407 counties out of the nation. Our Learning Community Resource Center team is pictured here on your screen, and so this group of people kind of help to make it all possible in working together to put out these webinars, facilitate the learning community groups, and so on. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and transition into our content for today. So I'm going to be passing it over to Kristen Abner, and she is with ICF International. And we also have Courtney Barthel with us today as well. So Kristen, I'm going to pass the ball over to you, and you can go ahead and take control.
Great. I'm hearing a little bit of an echo with my voice. Is that just me?
It's coming through clear on my end.
Okay, great. I can deal with the echo if it's just me. I don't want the rest of the people on the line to hear me echo the entire time. But hello, everyone. Happy Wednesday. We are very excited to be here to present to you today on this very interesting emerging practice area of opportunity, youth, and 2Gen practice. See if I can remember how to move the slide. There we go. So I want to start by introducing myself and Courtney Barthel, who will be presenting with you today. I am Kristen Abner. I completed my PhD in 2014 in sociology and really focused my dissertation on building knowledge on the role of the neighborhood and social supports in specifically child welfare involvement to think about how to design interventions to target the context where families reside. I worked for ICF for the last 13 years, so worked with them while I was in grad school, focusing on research to practice interventions. So I mostly work on websites and clearinghouses and getting information out there from the research to the practice. Most relevant for this audience, and you've heard from us before on the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse, or SSRC. So I'll talk about that a little later, and hopefully if we have enough time, I'll be able to show you all a demo of the website. And really the goal of each of the projects that I work on is to provide those resources and technical assistance for dissemination to practitioners, policymakers, and researchers in the field. About midway through the presentation, we'll probably pass the ball back and forth a few times. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Courtney Barthel. And Courtney and I have worked together at ICF for the last 13 years. So if you hear us complete each other's sentences, that is why. I joked the other day that I think I talked to Courtney more than I talked to my husband. So Courtney has 18 years of experience working with low-income and at-risk families and communities. She has a Master's of Public Affairs, and she provides strategic guidance, subject matter expertise, technical assistance services, and research support on a variety of TANF-related projects, and has, this is the really impressive number, she's designed, delivered, and evaluated over 100 technical assistance and training initiatives. So we like to give a roadmap on where we're going to go in the next hour. So we'll start with an overview and background of our relationship with CAP, move on to the research around 2Gen and opportunity use, and then really on to the practice on what's emerging in the field. And at the end of the presentation, we like to end with some key takeaways that we call tips for translation. And then hopefully I'll be able to do a brief demo of the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse. And if you have questions throughout the presentation, go ahead and submit them through the Q&A box, and we'll get to them at the end. Okay, so we would like to know where y'all are joining us from today. So if you can type in the chat box where you're from, that would be great. And while folks are typing, I will say that I am calling in from Richmond, Virginia, and Courtney is calling in from Michigan. And ICF itself is headquartered outside of DC in Fairfax, Virginia. I see a San Diego, Oklahoma, Missouri, New York, Boston, Tampa, Florida. I don't see anyone that's in the line of Hurricane Florence, but maybe folks have already evacuated. Vegas, Bradford, Virginia. I'm originally from Roanoke, so that's great. Thank you for sharing. I do want to send any safe thoughts for all of our folks that are in the line of the path of the hurricane. And I will hopefully, again, if I have time on the SSRC, we do have some really great resources posted on disaster recovery and things like that. So hopefully we can point those your way. So on to our relationship with CAP. So we have partnered with CAP, with the Learning Communities Resource Center, for the last 4 years. So this started with ICF presenting at a CAP national meeting on the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse. So the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse, it's a project that we have, and it's funded through the Administration for Children and Families Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation, or OPRE. And it's an online hub for professional networking for researchers, practitioners, and policymakers who are serving low-income Montana families. So our goal is to improve policy and practice in areas like employment, education and training, and family self-sufficiency by improving access to resources that are evidence-informed and field-tested. So again, I hope we have time to show you the website later. So since we did that first presentation, we have been providing materials and giving research to the CAP audience through the LCRC cluster groups. So we started a couple years ago, and we did place-based, family homelessness, and financial capability. And we also conducted a webinar on implementation science. And I think that is still available on the CAP website if any of you all are interested in that topic, because I think a lot of the information that we gave there is still relevant. Most recently, we engaged with the cluster groups on 2Gen, trauma-informed care, and bundled services. And some of you may have joined, so you are maybe used to our voices. So we're glad to have those of you on the phone that have already joined us, and we welcome those of you who are new for the first time. So you may have recently seen some of the work we've done here at ICF through the CAP blog series in Focus. So we started to contribute a few months ago, a few blog posts a month, where my colleagues and I have provided information on a variety of topics around work we do at ICF. So that includes opportunity youth, foster care, some work that we've done on reentry, and then engaging tribal populations. So I think the CAP website just got redone. So I don't have a link to where those are, but we are able to send that out once the website is back up and running with the blog information. So today, our goal is to give you resources on 2Gen approaches to poverty alleviation and also how it relates to opportunity youth. So this slide shows our learning objectives, and our main objective is to share the state of the research and the practice on 2Gen approaches and opportunity youth. And our second objective is to show you and talk about some effective practices that we've heard about so you can use them to improve your program. Okay, so as with the other CAP webinars we've done, we put together a research packet, and this provides you with a variety of resources related to 2Gen, which you may also already be familiar with, and opportunity youth. What we've done here is this topic is a little different than what we've presented on with CAP in the past, because this is an emerging area of practice where folks doing 2-gen practice have started to integrate in opportunity use into that practice. So the research hasn't caught up to the practice. So what we've done here is provide you with resources on 2-gen, resources on opportunity use, promising practices for implementation. And these are toolkits, reports, and briefs to offer practices and policy considerations for this emerging area. There are some existing programs that are doing this, and we'll talk about those a little later, but there are a list in the resource packet. And then finally, we end the resource packet with information on where you can go to find research, websites like the SSRC or the OFA, Office of Family Assistance Peer Technical Assistance Network. So on the next slide, I want to highlight, this is a page on the SSRC library. So if you click on your resource packet and go to the first resource in there, you'll see the link to what we call the SSRC library. So this is our library record, and we include we have librarians here and subject matter experts that actually review everything that goes into the library and provide tags or filters. So it can help you navigate through the resource without having to dig into the report itself. So we include research methodology of the report itself. We also include the target populations that the report is talking about. And then we also have topic areas and keywords and specific, what we like to call our popular search terms. So you can see what is this resource about. So you'll see, this is very tiny on my screen, so hopefully it's not tiny for everybody. This resource has a popular search term of 2-gen. So you'll be able to click back and forth from the library record to the whole collection as it relates to any of those topics at the bottom. And I'll show how that works a little later. Okay. So just briefly, as you all know, there are many challenges facing today's families, and parents' abilities to mitigate adverse child experiences are often impeded by additional challenges in establishing and maintaining healthy households. So there are 4 kind of challenges listed here that I just want to briefly talk about before I pass the ball over to Courtney to talk about the research. Many of these are I'm sure you all are aware of. In terms of the high quality child care with flexibility to support that non-traditional changing work hours. So even when low income families are able to access care, it's often not flexible. And many parents have reported quality concerns related to learning, development, or behavior more frequently than their higher income peers when it relates to child care. In terms of stable employment, nearly 80% of families with children under the age of 8 are headed by parents who lack higher education. And in our current economic climate, not having that post-secondary degree can limit career opportunities, and it can translate into that kind of inflexible work environment with low-paying jobs, for example. High levels of stress. Low-income families managing the challenges of financial insecurity and job uncertainty with juggling childcare, health, and transportation barriers can experience alleviated and constant levels of stress, which can feed into a cycle of family stress, compromised parenting, and childhood exposure to adverse experiences, which without protective factors can become toxic. And finally, uncoordinated human services. So programs and services designed to support low-income families are often not integrated or aligned and can create competing demands for families that they must comply with. These might be duplicative or even in conflict. So programs are not generally designed around other family members and how they and those needs as it relates to the entire family, and can leave parents choosing between accessing services which target child development or those that support their own employment. So compounding these challenges is that many low-income families face to maintain healthy and self-sufficient homes. The research demonstrates that children born into poor families are more likely to experience poverty as adults. So job training and employment programs have only marginally been successful in combating this reoccurrence, intergenerational poverty. And similarly, childhood development and school readiness programs without parental support and buy-in cannot by themselves stem intergenerational poverty. So these challenges really speak to a need to engage families in a two-generation model. And coupled with challenges facing opportunity youth, we are seeing that the two-gen model is really an effective strategy to engage opportunity youth, not only those with children, but those without children, to engage their parents. So with that, I will turn it over to Courtney.
All right, thank you, Kristen. So my task this afternoon is to chat with you all about what the research is telling us. And Kristen did a great job of talking about how, in this particular instance, this is somewhat of an avant-garde conversation, right, about the marriage of the two-generation model and opportunity youth. But before we go into what the intersection of those two topics looks like, I want to just do a quick reorientation of what we're talking about when we're talking about two-gen. As in the early slides, we have actually done a webinar about the specifics of two-gen. It's been a couple of years now, and I would say that most people had heard about two-gen, at least on the periphery then, and almost certainly everyone has heard about two-gen now, and to the point, I would say now, where folks are even feeling a bit bludgeoned about the two-gen model. And so what we want to be very explicit about when we talk about thinking about the next generation of two-generation is that no one is suggesting that we walk back the successes that two-gen has had. No one is suggesting that a focus on opportunity youth means to stop focusing on early intervention. So I want to kind of put that out there as a framing piece. The most probably famous of the two-gen models is from Aspen's Ascend. Many of you may have seen this before. All credit to them for the graphic. These are not our graphics. And the concept here is that when the historical approach to family service is that you had parent-focused programs and you had child-focused programs. And Kristen did an admirable job of talking about the implications of that lack of coordination. I'm sure many of you have had clients and relationships with folks who have said, I physically cannot comply with the competing demands of the programs if folks are involved in a multiple service kind of situation. And so the concept of multiple disciplines coming together and drawing on family resiliency and approaches to stress and family investment theory was trying to figure out how we actually grow self-sufficiency. How do we actually grow human capital across families? And the concept of focusing on the future occupational and self-sufficiency success of families is really what underpins the notion of coming towards a two-gen model. So in many cases, there are sort of child-focused two-gen programs and parent-focused programs. So it's either really the question of what door you're walking in. So some of the more famous two-gen models are started as early education providers and began offering parenting classes, or they started out as job readiness providers and they began offering more developmental services rather than just childcare so folks could come to classes. What has happened over time is that while programs across this continuum, vary in elements and service offerings, they measure, different interventions and they serve different audiences with different funding streams. They really share this common set of outcomes of interest and different focuses on types of longevity, despite the different areas that they might be working in. The value of the two-generation approach is driven by the things that you heard Kristen mention in her earlier comments. We were seeing these extraordinarily detrimental effects for kiddos who were living in poverty, who were growing up to live in poverty, who were not able to develop in healthy, age-appropriate ways across all kinds of physical, emotional, and cognitive domains, which is not to say certainly that that applies universally across every child in every home. But the research was showing us an extensive implication of the long-term effects of these adverse early childhood experiences and toxic stress. When the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard University joined the conversation in the mid sort of 2010, 2011 range, they added to that conversation and those sort of facts that we'd heard for a long time, the implications on the neurodevelopment of these families and of these kiddos, and how this long-term exposure to poverty could actually impact brain development and the neuroscience around things like executive function. Without the ability to develop those executive functioning skills, that was the key to unlocking the story of intergenerational poverty in a very real way, because we were understanding what it was about growing up in poverty that was facilitating and exacerbating ongoing poverty. So initially there was a focus primarily on custodial parents, but then as the movement continued, so now we're up into the 2015 research, there was a conversation about how non-custodial parents could be engaged through a two-generation model as well, understanding the demographics of what those populations look like and figuring out how to contextualize program offerings in order to address the very specific barriers that we're facing these families. So connecting folks to programs that would mitigate things like college education so that credentials could be earned and eventually stacked into more professional credentials. My slides don't want to change. Give me 1 second. Okay, here we go. In the backstory of 2Gen, it's not new. We've talked about 2Gen with different words for a long time. But historically, the challenge to adopting these two-generation programs were really twofold. One was there was this notion that you could just intervene in one space, that if you could just give parents better parenting skills, everything else would go away, and that would solve all of the problems. There was also an incredibly unrealistic expectation of how long that would take in the early models. These more mature models are showing us that this is going to be a long-term relationship. This is going to be a multiple type of intervention relationship. This is going to be a recognition that basic economics drive parenting in a very real way, and that sometimes the issue isn't as much about skills and learning new parenting skills as it is about having the economic flexibility to make the choices that you would otherwise choose to make for your family as a parent. Laying on top of all of that is the systemic reality of things like legislation and fiscal realities and all of the institutional change that comes with these kind of programs. So it was against all of that backdrop that these programs had to innovate, which is why you see such a long-ranging set of research from the late first decade of the 2000s to now. We're finally starting to see solid, replicable models that have undergone evaluation that we can feel reliably represent the promise of 2Gen. So then the question becomes, okay, now what? Because it isn't all the way fixed. We're still engaged in the work that Courtney did such a lovely job of introducing, and you all do such an amazing job of doing every day. So when we think about what the future of 2Gen looks like, we look at populations who are still not being served fully, and we look at folks like opportunity youth. So these are our friends. These are our opportunity youth. And this is a narrative that we hear in the media all the time. This is a narrative about what the workforce looks like, a narrative about what the low-income workforce looks like. And while nobody's suggesting that we should run out and start setting up lemonade stands on every corner, I think there's an important conversation to be had about what youth and opportunity youth specifically are doing. So we're going to talk about what we mean when we say the words opportunity youth, but I'm curious if folks can share with us in the chat box a little bit about the extent to which we're working with opportunity youth, the extent to which we're working with, let's say, older adolescents, if opportunity youth isn't a term that you're using in your organization. So go ahead and just chat us a couple of comments about what opportunity youth looks like in your programming. And while you're doing that, I will go ahead and talk to you about what opportunity youth looks like to us. So, like everything else in research, people don't like to agree on anything. So there's a lot of variability about what opportunity youth means. But what we generally mean by that are youth between 16 and 24, which are still in the adolescent research. This is really important detail. We tend to think of the early 20s in some ways as adults, and it's very much not in the neuroscience and in adolescent brain development, who are not working and not in school. So these folks have historically been called disconnected, and we're flipping that script, and we're talking about them as an opportunity. So I'm starting to see some comments coming in, 18 to 24, right, so the same kind of age group. It's a significant portion of our youth. It's a significant portion of our young people who are not connected to either the workforce or to school. And unsurprisingly, they're more likely to be poor. They're more likely to come from families that have had these long-term systemic challenges with employment and education. They're less likely to have their own educational credentials reached, and they're more likely than their connected youth, or connected peers, excuse me, to have children of their own. So what that does with these folks is it situates them in this really interesting space that we've historically called lots of different things, including things like sandwich generations and multiple generations, right? So you've got a population of folks who may have been the targeted population of a two-gen model as children through their relationship with their parents. They might have been served in an early education setting. Now they're aging out of those systems. They're aging out of whatever type of educational attainment they might have been working in. They're disconnecting, and they may now be parents themselves. But we know that developmentally, they're not ready to not continue to receive adolescent-facing services. We have this really interesting mix facing these folks. Ooh, this is a little bit small, but hopefully you can see this. So the concept of what it means to be in this population, we're talking significant proportions who have children, significant proportions who are facing homelessness, who have absolute lack of stability in some of the most basic needs that they have. We have a preponderance of mental health needs. We have a history of substance abuse. We have a history of arrest and conviction and incarceration, and we know from the research what the implications of that on future employment look like. And we have folks who need lots of support. But we also have folks who are abundantly gifted and abundantly opportunistic and can do incredible things with the right support. So we know that opportunity youth, talking about narratives for a second, right? Our favorite narrative about our friends who are in the millennial generation, right? That they don't want to stay connected to work, that they jump from job to job to job. Our opportunity youth are, according to research, twice as likely to stay connected to employment as their more traditionally measured peers. So not only are they a great resource to engage in your employment offerings, they're more likely to stay. Additional bonus fun fact, Generation X no less likely to jump from a job in their early 20s than the millennial generation. So you can share that one over dinner conversations tonight and see if you can stump your family. But when we talk about how we're going to serve and engage opportunity youth, and credit again to Aspen for their great thought and leadership about this, we are talking about understanding why folks have disconnected. What are the challenges on an individual level that are creating those barriers? Helping folks hit milestones to build momentum, right? We know from our own experiences how much easier it is to go to the gym the day after you've already been to the gym and how hard it is to go to that gym on the first day. Educational momentum works the same way for this population. We need to create pathways that have reachable, clearable milestones and a pathway that allows folks to get to our green box, which is a connection to a career that is meaningful and rewarding and self-sufficiency sustaining, to gain credentials, to gain connections, and to be able to break that cycle, while understanding that these are young people who have a potentially missed window of neurodevelopment around things that make it sometimes very challenging to be employable and to be stable. So we need to talk about the systemic barriers that face this population. We need to talk about fragmented services. We need to talk about resiliency, and we need to build executive function and stress management techniques in this population. So that's a lot. That's a lot of somewhat theoretical information about what the research says. So I'm actually going to pass the ball back to Kristen, give you a chance to listen to a different voice for a while, and talk about what it looks like on the ground. So Kristen, bear with me as I attempt to pass the ball to you. Let's see. I think, yeah.
You got it. I think, yep. Awesome. Okay, so the good stuff. So the practice. What are people actually doing around 2Gen and opportunity youth? So I did want to start that and say what's on the slide. So the policy and political climate for 2Gen approaches and programs to serve opportunity youth is noteworthy and supportive. So for 2Gen, we have several states, including Utah, Connecticut, and Colorado, just to name a few, that have passed legislation in favor of 2Gen programming, and bipartisan and public support is also significant and documented here. For opportunity youth, and so on the slides, which I believe will be posted, there are links to that legislation. And I also want to say that for opportunity youth, the federal government is taking strides to support older youth development, especially in opportunity youth through the reauthorization of WIOA, so in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which encompasses workforce opportunities for all ages, but provides specific funds to help older youth ages 14 to 24 engage in productive careers. And it targets 75% of the youth funds to opportunity youth. The law also contains a requirement that 20% of funds be spent connecting youth to internships and work experience. So as you can see, there is lots of political attention, and this has also increased funding in this area. So on the next slide, I want to mention, I know there's a cluster group on braided and blending funding, so this is relevant to folks on the line. I had a conversation with someone from Jobs for the Future who mentioned this funding to me that I had never heard of. So it's the Performance Partnership Pilots for Disconnected Youth, or P3, and they are offering, it's funded through the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2014, that's a mouthful, and it's providing authority to the Departments of Education, Labor, Health and Human Services, along with the Corporation for National and Community Service, the Institute of Museum and Library Science, and related agencies to enter into performance partnerships agreements with states to give them flexibility to use discretionary funds across multiple federal programs. So since 2014, it's expanded, and it includes programs also from the Department of Justice and Housing and Urban Development. So the pilot sites commit to achieving significant improvements for disconnected youth in education, employment, and in other key outcomes with this flexibility of funding. So P3 defines disconnected youth as individuals between the ages of 14 and 24 who are low income or homeless, in foster care, involved with juvenile justice, unemployed, or not enrolled in or at risk of dropping out of an educational institution. So the hope is that this flexibility is going to allow for more coordination between systems serving youth. So it's very interesting. Their resources and reports from these grants aren't out yet. There are a lot of resources on the website, which is available at youth.gov. But one of the programs that I wanted to mention is one of the current grantees is in Chicago, and the Department of Family and Support Services there, they braided their Head Start funds and WIOA youth funds to help opportunity youth mothers and their kids using a 2Gen model. The children are enrolled in Head Start while their mothers find part-time work at Head Start centers. They receive job training in early childhood education, mentorship, and individualized visits focused on personal and child development and therapy. So I the word is that that report will be available soon, but again, there's lots of information on these pilots through youth.gov. So now on to program examples. So I want to do a shout out to anyone on the line from Tulsa, anyone with Madison Strategies. I had the privilege of speaking with Karen Pennington at Madison Strategies, and they are working closely with CAP in Tulsa. So we may have some Tulsa CAP folks on the line as well. Some of you may be familiar with the Work Advance program. It has been extensively evaluated through a randomized control trial, and it's employer-driven training, and it provides a customized technical training class that includes job placement. It's funded through the Social Innovation Fund and the Mayor's Fund to Advance New York City. There's quite a bit of research on the success of the program, like I said. Data show that place customers earn 25% more on average after participating in the Work Advance program. And Madison Strategies has been a partner with CAP Tulsa on a few initiatives to include Work Advance, as well as the Health Professional Opportunity Grant that they received. So, and as many of you know, CAP Tulsa is really a pioneer in 2Gen practice. So what they're doing at Madison Strategies is that they're in their very early stages of incorporating opportunity use into practice. And so the program is really built off of Work Advance, and it's called Next Up. So they are taking practices that they know work and framing it in a way that resonates with 18 to 24-year-olds, some of which who have kids and some who do not. So they're using those fundamentals of Work Advance, but they're also integrating in soft and life skill training into the model. So these are things even as basic as setting a table, how to order off a menu, basic etiquette, understanding of bank statement, how to leave a proper voicemail on a cell phone, building a resume, how to interview. So they're really bringing youth to the conversation, and when they're talking youth, they're thinking about how much does it cost to have a child? So talking through those implications of having a child for youth that do have a child, talking through parenting skills and things like that. I thought one of the things that Karen said that was so, it resonated with me, but, you know, you have to think about youth in a way, so it's their idea. So she said it's kind of like selling a car and talking them into making decisions themselves. So they have really kind of worked in building that throughout their whole practice. So they've done, they recognized that their office wasn't child-friendly if someone needed to come in for a meeting. So they have a child room with a glass door if somebody has to bring their child when they have to come in. They are being very intentional about the challenges related to having children and trying to participate in programs. The other thing that they're doing that I thought was really interesting is they have open house events where folks can come and bring their kids, their families, or a support person. And they have age-appropriate activities for the children that are similar to what the parents are doing. So a 6-year-old might do a coloring page about a machine if a parent is learning machining. So the child leaves with something that's tied to that career and can feel really engaged in what the parent is doing. So that I found really kind of an interesting program. And like I said, they're just in the early stages, but they're using a lot of innovative ideas and building off of what we know about serving opportunity youth and what we know about the 2Gen model. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over to the host program, and I wanted to mention this because it is a public housing program. It was created and piloted by the Urban Institute, and really kind of the idea was to use public housing as a platform to employ 2Gen programs to address economic and social challenges. So they do joint workforce and educational support and mental health services for all family members together using strengths-based coaching and a community collaborative model. and it aims to address barriers to self-sufficiency while also building supports in for their children and youth. So there's a lot of information on the web about this program. One of the key findings they found in the evaluation was that opportunity youth really need tailored programming that builds in parental engagement for the opportunity youth, but also for opportunity youth with children. So talking through parental engagement, so holding family meetings that can include as many people as the family feels comfortable, and helping opportunity youth and their parents feel invested in each other's lives. All right, I'm going to pass the ball to Courtney for tips for translation.
Great, thanks, Kristen. So as much as Kristen and I would love to tell you all of the stories, and as much as Kristen and I and our wonderful colleague Sam, who's also on the phone, would love to come out and do like one-on-one relationships around how we can integrate the evidence into your programs, that's not something that's unfortunately going to be possible. So what we like to do with these tips for translation is talk about overarching strategies for taking the information that we're able to talk to you about today, as well as the information that's in that resource packet, and how you can actually apply it to what you're doing on the ground. So tip number one, find and use research. If you haven't figured this out yet, Kristen and I are big fans of the research base and figuring out how to extract information from the research base. But we also know that you're really, really busy and that that isn't the easiest thing to do. So how do we do that in an efficient way? We want to back up and say that we know that the message that comes down is about the necessity of evidence-based practice, and that best practices are identified through this rigorous linear pipeline of testing and scientific method, and that eventually you stand there at the end of the funnel as practitioners and you wait for the wisdom to drip out of the research funnel. And we just would like to say that we fundamentally reject that that's the only way to learn important things about what's going on. Not to say that I don't think randomized control is valuable. I don't think high internal validity is valuable. I do, but I also think that the process of learning is a lot less linear than that. We've told you twice, I think, so far in this webinar that the research sometimes lags behind the practice, and that you all are the ones out on the forefront innovating and figuring things out. And that phenomenon that we call practice-based evidence or practice wisdom matters. And I wanted to really underscore that before we talk about the other way that you can learn things. So in our SSRC, I'm going to steal a little of Kristen's thunder here. She's going to tell you later, if we have time to demo it, that there's almost 7,200 artifacts related to self-sufficiency in our library. And about 5% of those actually are related to 2-gen models. We want you to look at those, and we want you to look at the stories from Advance and from Next Up and from Host. We want you to take all of those things and put them into a really rich stew and read about all of them. But when you are sitting down and looking at the research, well, first you have to find it. So the shortcut for that is your research packet and the SSRC. Once you have it, and again, the SSRC gives you some shortcuts around whether or not you can trust the study, but if you find it somewhere else, the first question you have to ask yourself is, what are the data? What are the conclusions? What are the methods? Does this pass the sniff test? Does this make sense in terms of the question that was intended to be answered, the way that it went about being explored, and the conclusions that were reached? Can you trust it? Second, what are the constraints of the study? What are the limits on the ability for you to take what the study finds and apply it to your program? Are there too many differences between what the program was studying and what you want to do with the information? In real life, this might look like my 10-year-old deciding that she wanted to make chocolate chip cookies about a month ago, and upon discovering that we didn't have any brown sugar, confectioner's sugar would work just as well. Turns out, fun fact, that confectioner's sugar plus maple syrup actually works lovely in chocolate chip cookies, but I would have preliminarily said confectioner's sugar is too different. So is the study setting too different? Is the research context too different? What can you take? What are the limitations? And then finally, what does it all mean? what can I take from this? What is the key message? And how can I communicate that to folks in my world, in my setting, legislatively, programmatically, fiscally? Okay, tip number 2, use fiscal mapping to be creative on funding. Fiscal mapping may be something that's new to all of you, so I do want to just talk a little bit about what that means, what it looks like. But before I do, one of my favorite things to do when I'm facilitating meetings and we're talking about program improvement is to say to people, if you had a magic wand, what would you do? What would you do differently? And almost universally, I hear, I wish we had more money. I wish budgets weren't so tight. I wish I could do more. I wish I could serve more. I wish I could help more. Unfortunately, we don't have that magic wand, and we don't have the deep pockets to make all of those wishes come true, but we do have some creative funding strategies that might help stretch limited resources a little bit further. And one of those is this notion of fiscal mapping. So this is from our friends at Jobs for the Future. If you're not familiar with JFF, they do some really great work around youth employment. And they have this toolkit around how to think about mapping your own fiscal practices. So in another real life example, this might be that moment that you sit down with your budget and realize that, you know, you made 37 orders from Amazon last month and you thought you made 12. There's this reality of understanding what the real fiscal picture is and not getting caught up in the ongoing back and forth about where the constraints are, but really thinking about what the audience is, what the scope is, what the reasoning is, how you're going to get from where you are to a meeting with the right stakeholder, to an appropriate guideline, to a data collection parameter. And what's great about it is it's very much a toolkit, so it's going to show you how to do those things. My very favorite thing about it is that it doesn't assume that when you pick up the toolkit, you'll be able to sit down at your desk and start working. It actually starts with readiness assessment. And all of you know from the work that you're doing with clients every day and with stakeholders every day, that if you don't start with that common framework and that ability to be ready to do the first intervention, then you're setting yourself up for failure. So we strongly encourage you to take a look at fiscal mapping from Jobs for the Future. All right, tip number 3, study successful 2-gen approaches. We've talked about this. There are lots of programs. Cap Tulsa has been mentioned. We had some others mentioned. I know that many of you could also be featured on this slide. But in addition to looking at those programs and reading their stories, we want to give you some things to look for, some key considerations that when we look at the population of successful 2-gen programs, we see held in common. So these are sort of your common themes, if you will. I'm not necessarily going to talk about all of these because some of them are very self-explanatory, but if you have not seen Simon Sinek, S-N-I-E-K, and his TED Talk about starting with why, I would encourage you to take a look, take a listen. It's set in the business context. It's shown, I guarantee you, in MBA programs across the country now. But what's fascinating about it is his ability. I see your question, Sinek, Simon Sinek, S-I-N as in Nancy, E-K as in kickball, Sinek, the TED Talk. And he's wonderful. And his whole point is reframing your planning purposes around your why. And that his catchphrase is people don't buy what you sell, they buy why you sell it. And I would argue that in your context, funders don't fund what you do, they fund why you do it. So if you can change your story, if you can change your program offerings to be centered around that why, right? And why isn't because I need to get paid in 2 weeks, because if that was your why, you would be doing something else, I'm guessing, right? Why is about those folks and those people that you're trying to serve. And if you can articulate your why, then the service offerings that your organization needs to add to serve your communities will become abundantly clear. And the space that opportunity youth and 2-gen need to occupy in your service offerings will be abundantly clear. So I strongly encourage you to take a listen to that. I encourage you to continue listening to your families. Almost universally, folks, especially the longer we've been doing this, we start to think that we've heard it all, that we know what people need. It turns out that even if you're right about that, they still need to tell you. So I really encourage folks to remember how important it is to be in that listening space. One more little pro tip, my favorite thing I just heard at a meeting this past summer, a participant sharing with me that she has one sticky note on her desk, and on that sticky note in big black marker it says the word wait. And I thought, well, that's lovely. That's lovely, right? We all need to remember to wait and give people space and time. And she said, oh no, it's more than that. So, I sat there and I nodded and I waited for her to tell me, and she said, it stands for why am I talking? And I thought, what an amazingly powerful reminder of the importance of listening and waiting. And the only other one of these I'm going to highlight for you, again, in the interest of time, is to really think about dual outcomes for parents and children, including opportunity youth in the context of children, because while they would, in many cases, reject that term, there's a lot of neurosimilarity between those populations. Those opportunity youth should be an integrated part of the program with a shared dual outcome, not necessarily an independent set of outcomes, because the challenge with independent outcomes is they tend to become competitive. So if you can find a way to integrate the outcomes so that they're collaborative and working together, it will go a long way. I know that we're running very short on time. I will skip ahead here quickly to just say that it is possible to 2Gen with opportunity youth. It is possible to integrate the data and the requirements. It is possible to find the support at the legislative and policy levels. It is possible to do this. There are good resources, and Kristen and I are always available to answer questions and help connect you with others who may have some experience in this space. I'm going to pass the ball back to Kristen for some closing comments and some additional resources, but we do encourage you to reach out. Our contact information is in the slides, and we really appreciate the chance to talk with you all today.
Thank you, Courtney. I hadn't heard the sticky note story. I love that. I'm going to use it. I'm going to do it myself, but I also already have like 10 sticky notes on my desk, so I don't know if it's going to work for me, but I'll try. Okay, so additional resources. I am going to talk about the SSRC, but first I did want to mention the National Center for Student Parent Programs. This was another recommendation from Jobs for the Future. So they started a Keys for Degrees program to support single parent students with wraparound services for themselves and their children. And they provide educational support, for college and integrating in high quality early education programs. So they use on-campus affordable housing with fellow student parents, academic support services, and postgraduate transition help. So there's a lot of resources on their website about these programs. So I would encourage you to go to College with Kids if you're serving youth that have children that are in university or community college programs. So on to the SSRC. I don't want to cut us short for question time, so what I'll do is just do a brief overview of the SSRC beyond what we've talked about, and I did want to put it out there for folks. We can do virtual website demos for you or your partners. We've done it I've done it recently for the Colorado Department of Human Services, their county director meeting. I have done it for the Food and Nutrition Service Research Interest Group. So if you see the SSRC and you think it might be of interest to you or your staff or anyone you're working with, reach out to me. I think my email is at the end of the presentation, or Cap can get you in touch with me, and we are more than happy to do a personalized demo on finding research on the SSRC. Let's see. So the SSRC, like I said, is federally funded through the Office of Planning, Research, and Evaluation within the Administration for Children and Families. And we've been working on this website for the last 10 years. So my company, ICF, we lead the design and maintenance of the website with research support also from Child Trends and the Urban Institute. So the goal of the SSRC is to be a virtual portal of research. So we really are part of the strategic mission of OPRE to build and disseminate knowledge about approaches to help low-income children and families. So as you'll see from the next slide, the SSRC has tools and information to help you design evidence programs, evidence-driven programming, and resources to determine what outcomes you might want to measure or how you might want to do evaluation through our list of publications. So what is the SSRC? So when we started, we had a 2-year design phase, and really that was designed to bring experts in and talk about what does self-sufficiency really mean. So we organized the website around these 12 topic areas. When we sat in the room with folks in the research field, folks in the practice field, policymakers, you know, we talked about these areas. So our website is all designed around these topic areas. So we have asset building, child care, child support. I won't read them to you because you can see them on the slide. We also include a page on data and evaluation. And so if you need resources on understanding evaluation, we have a toolkit on that provides definitions on what does a randomized control trial really mean? What is an ethnography? So those kind of research terms and methodologies we provide on our data and evaluation page. We also host webinars on a variety of self-sufficiency topics. We had a webinar, it feels like it was forever ago, but it was less than a month ago in August, around understanding the minimum wage, where we try to bring together a researcher, a practitioner, and a policymaker to really kind of offer different perspectives on an issue. So I would encourage you to go to our website and sign up for our listserv so you can learn about our webinars. We are working on a webinar for the fall on career pathways. So look out for that. So how you can use the SSRC. So the kind of bread and butter of the SSRC is our library, and I am going to try to share my screen. So Courtney, share my screen. There we go.
Yep, we can see it.
You got it, okay. So this is the SSRC website, and what I'm going to do is go into our library so you can see the library. So you'll see we have 7,100 resources in here, and the great thing about these resources is that they're all reviewed by our team here. So you know that you're getting trusted research. We review for things that we call it fatal flaw review to make sure that the documents meet identified standards of what we call good research. I used air quotes there. So things like the literature review has citations in it. The findings that the author says in the conclusion are actually backed up by the data they provide, things like that. So the key here is that this collection we only include if materials are around improving self-sufficiency of low-income populations. So we include research on the quality of childcare, but only as it relates to self-sufficiency. I want to point out 2 filters related to this webinar. This is kind of a unique way to search the website using these filters here to your right. And we have what we call our popular search terms. And these, instead of typing, you can certainly type in the keyword box. But these are the way to get the resources that are really specifically about a topic. So we have 2Gen, and we also have transition to adulthood, so topics related to the webinar. And if you click on 2Gen, you'll see any resource in here that is mostly about 2Gen. So you're not going to get something in this list that has 2Gen listed on page 100 of a dissertation in a footnote. So when our team reviews the research, they only get these tags if the research is really about that topic. So I did want to point that out because that's something that makes us unique. The other great thing about the SSRC library that's different from other search engines is that we include conference presentations. So a lot of times, you know, people will present on research in conference when it's pre-paper, before it's out there in a journal article or published on a website, so emerging research. So we will include conference presentations in the collection. So that really gives, I think, a great kind of that emerging research out into the field as well. I'm trying to be quick. What I did also want to point you all to, let me see. I'm going to do a keyword search for emergency preparedness, like I mentioned in early on. Oh, why did it say no results? Did I spell something wrong? Uh-oh. Let me see. Oh, because I'm in 2Gen. So you'll see, I'll go here and then I'll go back. So I had that 2Gen filter. That's why emergency preparedness didn't show up, because we don't have anything in the collection on 2Gen and emergency preparedness. But we do have this SSRC selections series. We have, I think we're now close to 50 SSRC selections, and these are what we like to call our top 10 list. And again, I'm making air quotes on, you know, if you want to learn about a topic, what are the top 10 resources you might want to read about? So you can poke around the website on these SSRC selections, and they link to research around the topic. So this is our one on 2Gen. But I'm going to go back to the library because I did want to point out that emergency preparedness, but I'm going to reset my search this time, and hopefully it'll pop up. Otherwise, I'm going to chalk it up to website gremlins. There we go. So if you go into our website and search for emergency preparedness, we do have SSRC selection as it relates to that for folks that may be in the in the line of the hurricane. So for current research on emergency preparedness and self-sufficiency in serving low-income populations. Let me go back to the library. The last thing is how to subscribe to our listserv. So, and we send out 2 email alerts a month, so you don't have to feel like we're going to clog your inbox. But under Stay Connected, if you go to subscribe to the SSRC, you can sign up to receive our listserv. I think that's all I'm going to do now on the website, so we have time for questions. So I will stop sharing my screen. Courtney Kohler, can you help me stop sharing my screen? Oh, there we go. Stop sharing.
Yeah, okay. Yep, you got it.
The big red button that tells me to stop sharing will tell me to stop sharing. So, questions?
All right. Well, I'm looking through to see if any have come in so far. So if any of the participants on the line, if you have any questions, you can type those into the chat box and send them to all panelists. I think we've already gotten several of them kind of answered. As far as the name of the person you mentioned earlier. We had a couple questions on recording, and we will have the recording available after the webinar, as well as a PDF of the slides. So if you go under Tools and Resources and go to Webinars, that's where you will find that. Should be by the end of the week or early next week that we have all that up there. But if you do have trouble finding it, just send me an email and I can help you out. We did have a comment earlier that came in from our Nashville agency, Metropolitan Action Commission, about how that, whenever we were talking about kind of what is opportunity youth, and they were talking about their program that they offer, a youth technology program for teen siblings of Head Start, Early Head Start for ages 13 to 15. So I wanted to just kind of share that out to the group.
And this is Courtney Barthel. That program sounds really interesting, and Lisa, I believe, was the commenter. If my contact information is in there, if you want to shoot me a quick email, I'd love to learn more about what's happening around that in Nashville.
Yeah, that would be great to connect. All right, I think that's all that I'm seeing that's come through that we haven't already answered. So what I can do is I can go through the last few slides of some of our kind of upcoming announcements. But if anyone does still have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and type those in and we'll get those addressed. Oh, we did have one more come in actually, so we'll go ahead and answer that one. Where does race intersect with 2Gen and the self-sufficiency theory?
That, that should be a webinar all on its own. It's a great question. It's one of the things that I didn't talk about on the tips to translation on that last slide about the importance of contextualizing your offerings and being aware of institutional barriers and the entire history of disadvantaged populations and the sociology behind all of this. Unfortunately, what I can't tell you is that there's an excellent research, piece of research that you should go out and read that's about exactly that thing in terms of 2Gen. It doesn't exist. So we have to do the work around cultural competence plus 2Gen plus social work plus income assistance plus community action and sort of situate it at the center of the dialogue. You're absolutely right to say that that isn't something that we should have skipped on that slide. And it's critically important to deal with intersectionality. It's critically important to deal with cultural competence. It's critically important to understand the institutional realities that contextualize the conversation.
All right, thank you. That is a good question. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions at this time, so I'll just let you know about our upcoming webinar opportunities. If people do have last questions, please send those in. Big thank you to Courtney and Kristen today for presenting. We really appreciate your time and your effort in sharing this information with us. I think it was really good and a really great complement to the 2Gen, information that we've been learning, and kind of brings in one of those almost missing pieces. So really great information. We do have a couple webinars coming up, and we have next week Building Wealth Across Generations. Prosperity Now will be presenting that webinar 2 p.m. Eastern Time next Wednesday. And then we have FSG Consulting, and they will be presenting, this is our fourth webinar of a mini-series we've been doing around collective impact. So they will be talking about community engagement and equity for collective impact. So those are our remaining webinars for September. We are working on getting our fall webinar Wednesday schedule out to everyone. So we're actually going to be kind of expanding our webinar Wednesdays beyond the learning community topics. Of course, we will still definitely have learning community topics in there, but just as we are working with agencies to integrate their services, we're trying to actually integrate our programs and trainings a little bit more. So we're going to be offering our webinar Wednesdays across our various programs, of community economic development, energy partnerships, organizational standards, our learning community topics. So basically just look forward to a great topic every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, and they'll be kind of spanning across those different areas that we provide training and technical assistance within. And you can register for those webinars on our website under Events tab, and then go to Upcoming Webinars. Our contact information is here on the screen as far as our training and technical assistance team and Learning Community Resource Center. So feel free to reach out to any of us with any questions you might have. I'm the third one down, Courtney Kohler, so if you do have any issues trying to find the recording or the PowerPoint after a couple days from now, please feel free to send me an email and I'll get you connected with that information. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up for today. Really appreciate everyone's time. Courtney or Kristen, do you all have anything else you wanted to add?
No, just a big thank you again for including us, and we hope that this was helpful, and we hope to see all of you over on the SSRC looking at the research.
All right. Thank you all. Appreciate it. Everyone have a great day.